was thinking like superpower.
Oh, yeah.
Or my other thought was mediocre power. Like it's not a superpower, but it's like mine would be like finding like the right wrench or like socket for
Yeah.
Every
things
time.
I'm working
Just
on
reach
every
in
time.
and grab.
Yep.
Hmm.
Where
Like
it's
that one where
that's an 8. Yep. Okay. So
I knew
This is
that.
less useful with USB-C, but that one that was from ages ago where everyone's like, I want to get the USB right every time.
yes,
Mm.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Easy when you get to know, the layout of the plug, but
Yeah, it's a quality of life power rather
yes.
than a rather than a
Yes.
superpower.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna need to think about that one. Anybody else?
Or we could do superpower.
I like the quality of life power. I feel like that's
Yeah.
It's hard to answer. I feel like you had the best one right there, being like
Right?
I was like, that
Right.
one's like top tier quality of life power for you.
The other one, if it helps anybody, is like in the kitchen. If it's like measuring something, like no matter what the scoop is, it's always like the right measurement. You don't have to like level it
one
off. It's just
too.
like, right? So it's just like, here we go.
I like that.
That would
I don't
be-
have an answer though.
I know. That's I like the measuring one a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We can have
Hmm.
similar ones. It's okay.
I suppose we could be in agreement of having the same ones, but
Or you're like always like you have like an internal clock that always tells you like even
You're so good
right-
at this.
Damn it, you're like literally I was about to say that because
Yes,
but I was
Oh.
gonna do it
Oh, there's
specific
a
to
I need to go now because
oh
for
yeah,
some
like
reason,
exactly how long it takes to
it's
travel
45
somewhere.
minutes. Yes.
Mm.
Yep. I was
Would
actually
that-
thinking like this is less relevant now with streaming, but like imagine if you always knew when your TV show was about to start during cable
Mm.
Yep.
Yeah.
and you could be like, oh, now I need to turn the
No.
and during ads, like you know exactly how long the ad's gonna be.
I don't think any of you are an age where you did have to be in that mindset. And there is a level of anxiety that may come from that
No,
isn't
And my country is
necessarily
10 years behind this one. I lived in that
ideal.
for most of the 90s.
I was gonna say
Which were the
Just-
80s in Australia.
and
Exactly.
trying
That's how
to
far behind we were.
trying to carry that idea over to be like my mom would have us clean at night if like my dad was working late during commercials.
Yeah.
Like, okay, it
Mm.
started,
Oh, yeah.
but we have stuff to do. So
Exactly.
go.
Or if we had to record something for mum or dad, the stress of trying to make sure we like hit it right, or
Right.
worse, when we're like, no, I can do this and I'm going to cut out the ads. And just the intensity of us like sitting there with the recording button.
Not
Like, you
even
gotta do it.
entertained.
yeah,
Like
see, as the
the-
youngest person on this podcast, and I think everybody's done because I was like, I had to do the run
Yeah.
and grab a snack. I was like, but did I get TiVo when I was 8? Yes. Yes, I did. So
Damn.
I didn't get it. My parents got it. Let's put it that way. Spoiled child.
I was gonna
So,
jump
like-
off and say we had antenna TV, like
Yes.
so
I
like
still
getting
have
the
antenna
right
TV.
but getting the right every time you're just like boop, there it is. That would be
Yeah.
awesome.
Your guys' are so good. I'm realizing that I don't think I like that much ease in my life. I'm like, I like making a mess when I cook. I don't know. I like digging through stuff and I never put stuff back in the right place. I don't know. There's a part of my brain that can't even think about making something easier. I kind of like
Well,
it
I mean-
not to be easy.
As a quality of life power there, what if every time you cooked, it never stuck to the pan?
It would make Andrew happy. Not this Andrew. My Andrew.
No, I don't give a shit about your pants.
Ah.
Hands
Uh,
Should you, but
suck
yes,
it.
as the
Like,
person who bought me the pot holder that has Cinderella on it that says I don't do dishes, I don't do dishes.
Nice.
There's my quality of life that if Andrew ever was no longer in my life for some horrible reason, I would want dishes to be magically cleaned.
I think that's
There
a
you go.
full-blown superpower. And I think we like
Yeah.
that sounds
think that's
amazing.
called- That's just called paper plates.
Okay, just my coffee pot
I've done
magically
that.
cleaned every time. By the time sent you, just the coffee pot.
Touche.
Nice. Well, I think that's our opener. Today on our Tech for Business podcast, Kelsey and I are joined by Anne, our quality assurance analyst and GRC specialist, Matthew, our VCSO, and Andrew, our customer strategy advisor. We're discussing something that applies to, I think, all industries in one way or another, and that is compliance. So to start us off, where are we today, and are there any recent trends or developments that you're seeing in compliance and its requirements?
I'll start by saying that if you don't have a compliance requirement, you should have a compliance requirement. And I'm going to set the tone for the whole podcast by saying that out front. In short, where are we now? Well, if you're listening to this, you've probably listened to the other podcasts, so you've probably heard us all talk about this a little bit. You've heard me do the alphabet soup that is the NIST, CMMC, HIPAA. We have podcasts for a lot of these already. But the short version is that there is a lot of different compliance requirements. They span multiple industries. And one thing that we're coming up to now is that a lot of these are not outdated. I think that's the wrong way to put it. They are reaching the point where they no longer span the gamut of everything that we use on a day-to-day basis, of everything we need. A lot of them being updated. CMMC V2 came out a year and a bit ago now. It's still being updated and finalized, and probably will continue to be for a little longer. FTC guidelines got updated, and they go into effect, I think, on the 9th of June this year. I think it's the 9th of June. NIST CSF 2.0 has been announced. The NIST 800-171 revision 3 updates are currently open to comments. We're seeing that these currently in place and currently, I've forgotten the word that I'm looking for, but effectively these compliance requirements that are in place, these frameworks that are currently being used, are getting updates. It's been 10 years since there's been a HIPAA update of any kind. So we're noticing these changes come through, and at the same time, there's a big push for AI. In the past 6 months, it's gone from not something we would ever really look at to something that many of us use, even if it's not for work purposes, just for fun. So as part of this, we're talking about what's changing, why it's changing, what those changes may look like, not just in the short term, but also in the longer term, as well as how it's going to impact us and everyone, really. Yeah. Is that a brief enough overview?
Yeah, for sure. That was quite a large overview. So I don't know if someone wants to kind of go into more details about those things, or just the growing importance of compliance and data and security.
We're continually looking for that crossroads of where the controls related to the speed of technology keep it at that X and not way behind, like 10 years of HIPAA, or not yet ratified in a sense like CMMC.
Yeah.
I think that kind of we want it to be somewhere near the speed of technology, and that seems like a daunting task, but getting that compliance mindset added to where these policies and requirements are developed within the tools that we see. I mean, there's my dream, maybe.
And
wait a second, let's think about how this will impact HIPAA. No.
And when, I think we've spoken about this before, but the original HIPAA requirements, the original requirements that came out in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, do you remember how out of touch with what was actually going on they felt? specifically like password requirements or lack of requirements or lockout tools, I felt like back then they were a lot further away from that point you were talking about, that crossover point, than they are now.
Yes. Just I'm at a loss for words. It is just, yeah.
It's better now, is what we're
Thank
saying.
you.
Is what I feel, at least. And
it is much better. It is like so many other compliance requirements and how any industry tries to keep up. We have historically been behind the curve. We do make leaps and bounds in trying to make environments meet the requirements that you have as far as compliance. But I know it won't ever be at that speed, but we have made a great headway in trying to keep up. So I don't mean to spin it negatively. It is an uphill battle though, all the time.
And so with HIPAA not being up to date within the last decade, is there a standard that, like we go off of from CIT? Like, I know, I believe it's NIST, but that if we're saying somebody's coming in for HIPAA, we're saying, okay, well, you actually should look at NIST because that's a better one and it will meet all of our HIPAA requirements, or how does that work?
So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, most recently, and this has been going on for a while, but it's really come to the forefront most recently, there's things coming up called crosswalks. NIST has done this for HIPAA, and a crosswalk is basically taking all the stuff from one framework and making sure it aligns correctly with another. So NIST has released a document for their NIST cybersecurity framework. We shorthand that to the CSF, that directly correlates NIST CSF with HIPAA. That is not normal. And finding people that do that or finding ways to do that is quite difficult. There is a number of frameworks that claim to, or that can. There's a number of tools that can, but generally you don't want to do that. And the reason for that is that if you're following HIPAA, the person who you have to impress is not the board of directors, it's the auditor. And the auditor doesn't want to see NIST language. They want to see HIPAA language. This is very true in the financial industry. If you try and show them all your documentation with different names and try and explain how they correlate,
they don't care.
Yeah, it's, because the FFIEC has a specific handbook that says, here's how you judge if this meets the requirement for auditors. So there's very specific rules, and given that, it's best to follow one and follow the one that you have to meet. Having said that, if you don't have one that you have to meet, the NIST CSF is a great starting point. It is the one that we recommend and push as our guideline for customers. And as I mentioned at the very start, it is getting an update to version 2.0 shortly. I think the draft may actually be out. I'd have to confirm, but it is being worked on. And to tie in with with something I think you meant from the question, one of the big changes that happened from the original HIPAA to the version that we see now, and this is across the board in every change, is that they're less about do X. They're not saying you have to have AES 128 encryption, because that got outdated very quickly. They're saying ensure you have up-to-date and best, what's the language they use? Industry standard encryption at rest. So what they're doing with the phrasing now is trying to remove that part that ages it.
Making it
so
more
that
flexible.
Exactly, to make it a little more modular. One of the things we find those times when you see it now where they're explicit about what it has to be feel a little bit out of date for that reason. CMMC has a FIPS requirement, which is a great requirement, very, very useful, but also has that same feeling of how long is it going to be until this requirement's out of date. So in short, there's nothing wrong with following, and you should follow the one that you're actually required to meet. But if you don't have one you're required to meet, NIST CSF is a great starting point. And it's not in crazy language. It's not, you don't have to understand or break down FFIEC regulations to understand it. You don't have to read their definition of what a person is to understand how to complete their regulations. And you don't want to be honest. It was just a crazy day trying to get through those documents. So yeah, and this CSF is a great starting point.
And I always come back to if we're looking ahead as compliance and the different, say, agency and oversight, what makes, I know that many of our industries have higher security requirements than, say, my family would. However, big comma, my family touches every part of those industries. There's education, there's banking. So when Matthew does say something like, this is a guideline that you should be familiar with, do I expect my husband to go read this? No. But do I think it's a solid framework to look at for even yourself? Absolutely. And again, I don't expect anyone to just like hunker down and let's go read some requirements. But it's a good solid framework to say, do we really need this? Do we at a base level need this? Or does my bank do this? Does my kids' school do this for information protection? How are they protecting this? How are their compliance of my information or my children's being met? So there's so much crossover that it really is, it becomes everybody's interest and problem, and whether or not we decide to look forward and try to keep up with where those go is kind of up to us.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it may not be a 3 or 4 letter agency specifically that is requiring this of a business, but it's the insurance agency that you'll probably hear from first if it's not one of those others, because they're going to say, okay, cyber insurance, here's what you have to show us, and a lot of those are based off of those established frameworks.
Exactly.
So it's kind of that foot in the door of going, okay, so you're starting to do this. And okay, so now we're going to start requiring this. And we've seen it time after time where it's a requirement in those frameworks and those standards. And then insurance, being better than the government agencies sometimes, goes, oh, okay, we should require that. They can update it a little bit sooner on that yearly policy.
You've made a good point, Andrew, that Anne and I discuss this regularly, and I'll bring it up here, which is that it tends to follow the money, right? And this leads into something that I want to talk today about Meta. So just this week, Meta was hit with a $1.3 billion fine from the GDPR rules in the EU because of how they were transferring data. So this is a thing called data sovereignty, which is data for a country that relates to people from that country should stay in that country. The EU works this way. And so transferring data back and forth and then saying it was only in one location when it wasn't in just one location resulted in a $1.3 billion fine. Now, is Meta going to pay that? I don't know. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that's going to go into this, but Meta has insurance. So if Meta's not paying it directly, their insurance is. And so all of a sudden, insurance companies back here in the US are going to be saying, what if we get hit with that? Could we pay that type of fine for our customers? And so what they're going to do is they're going to update their reviews for next year to cover the questions that would have caught Meta having this so that they wouldn't have had to pay out for Meta. So they're trying to they're basically getting their own affairs in order, which therefore requires you to. 1.3 billion is the largest fine of this type, and it's going to make a lot of people pay attention. So following that money and seeing that the insurance companies are saying, I'm not going to pay that out, how can we make sure we don't in the future, is where we see a lot of these changes come through, especially if they're unexpected.
Yeah, and if anybody's not familiar, Meta is the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and those applications. So
Thank you.
sorry, I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
Just straight in the zone again. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no worries. That's why I'm just like, I'll just let that know. We've all heard of Facebook, right? Like, but not everybody knows that Meta, they split off and did all kinds of crazy stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, and prior to this $1.3 billion fine, the largest was for Amazon. It was $805.7 million. Now, those fines are huge, and I'm sure those of you who work and do your cybersecurity insurance reviews notice changes in 2021 and 2020. Now, obviously, COVID was a large part of that, but I guarantee there are questions on those forms that come directly from that Amazon payment as well. And so we're going to see more changes for that same reason. So while we can't 100% tell what changes are going to be short-term and long-term, we can use some of these to gauge what we're going to see going forward. We have a podcast on cybersecurity incident response plans, and that podcast goes into a lot of how to create them, as well as covering the fact that we're starting to see more and more of them required as part of cybersecurity renewals, and people getting their cybersecurity renewal rejected for their insurance if they aren't having certain things in place. That change I noticed around 2021. The precursor for it, I don't know. But I do know that all of a sudden, people were being requested a document, a policy document with proof that they're using it and updating it that previously had been completely ignored.
Yes.
Yeah, no one even knew what it was called unless you were already Fortune 500. So these things trickle down. Data sovereignty, I want to mention again because I do think it's a big one, and it's going to keep getting more and more important, which is making sure your data doesn't go elsewhere. Microsoft is on this already. There is a lot of ways to make sure your data stays in the US and doesn't leave the country. Definitely look into that if you have any concerns about it. There's ways to make sure that happens. Same with AWS. Amazon Web Services can make sure the same thing if you're storing that data in the cloud.
And that's it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's an EU policy, correct? That's something that they passed and that is in those countries.
Yeah, so obviously my knowledge of Australian law on this is a little bit more filled out than my EU law, but Australia and the EU both have data sovereignty laws, especially for medical health data. Yeah.
Okay.
But it does expand. The GDPR is very blatant, basically saying, I'm not sure on the exact language, but I think it's anyone who's the information of anyone who's a member of the EU that relates to their location or identifying information about them in relation to certain things.
That we would consider pretty benign, like the association of a person to an email.
Yeah.
That's how granular it gets. And it is pretty eye-opening to see how other people preserve privacy. And to Matthew's point, I would not be surprised in any way, shape, or form if we start seeing those kind of compliance requirements trickling in within the US. We are all about information sharing until we're not. So that's my experience anyway.
Yeah. So obviously, Anne and I, we spend our 90% of our day staring at compliance requirements or working with people to help them get better. Andrew, it's a little different for you. You work more with the customers on business needs and how to make sure it's being implemented. What type of things do you think they can be done? Because I want to kind of pull back from that. Hey, here's exactly what the policy says and here's exactly what the requirement is, and talk about how you found it can be implemented maybe a little bit easier or without causing undue harm or stress to the organization.
Yeah, honestly, the biggest thing is communication. When it really breaks down to if you're having a security audit, if it's a cybersecurity audit or insurance, policy renewal, communicating with us and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. What can I do? We've done a really good job. I'll toot CIT's horn a little bit of making sure the things that we've have seen in insurances and insurance requirements are included in our managed services contracts. If that is email encryption, if that is spam protection, if that's EDR, if that is cybersecurity audits, I can go on. Check the website. CIT-net.com. I'll plug it for all the things that are included in our managed services contract. And you'll see that a lot of the things that are included in any level of our managed services contract ticks a lot of those boxes. So part of what I see is just trying to help explain to the customer before Matthew and Ann come on of, okay, what does it look like to implement EDR? Are there, any hurdles? Here's why you should implement EDR, or this is why you should have this policy. And doing that on a, quarterly, biannual basis, of looking at, a baseline of what we expect our customers to have. Just like insurance has that, we have our own. Because we want our customers to be safe. We want our customers to make sure they don't have any incidences or greatly reduce any risk of that. I can never say 100% we're going to stop everything because we can't. But we can do a heck of a lot to make sure that we can stop it from spreading or getting out of control. So, really just having conversations of why you should start implementing a certain password change, communication of that to the team of why it's important. One of the bigger ones is multi-factor, is having that, and it can be a bear for some environments. Because it's okay, so I'm logging into here, and okay, so I need my phone now, and that, and the things that come with adding another security tool. But I think it's also talking and knowing that the technology behind it of going, okay, well, there's features that we can do to help. One of the examples is geofencing. So if you're within a certain area with like the business, it's not going to ask for it, because it knows that you're inside the building, it knows it's you. But if you're out at Starbucks or at your house, it's going to do that second verification. So I think, again, the communication of what some of those features are, why they're there, is really big, and something that I like having, because it usually ends positively. It goes from a frustration with a technology and a certain regulation that somebody is forcing upon them to, oh, this is why I should have it. And it becomes more of a personal choice instead of a forced choice.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. There's so many times when I see people coming to us and reaching out because they are in a bind, in that they've been given 2 or 3 weeks. This is when the FTC updates came through, many car dealerships found that they were actually falling under those requirements. And so all of a sudden they went from not having official requirements to meet to having a lot to meet. That's tough. That's scary, especially when the numbers were included in how much this is expected to cost. And those numbers are not small numbers. We're looking 6 figures to implement and recurring fees throughout the year. And that's a requirement for the FTC guidelines. So as part of that, our goal, and a lot of what I know Andrew does, is prepping for that. By the time you've met with Ann and I, we're probably already saying, okay, here's where you're missing something, or here's what you should do next. From my understanding, Andrew, it's more about kind of prepping them ahead and saying, let's plan for this. And is that kind of why the NIST CSF came up? If you don't have one already, how can you not get blindsided by
Yeah.
some of these.
Yeah, like
Yes.
that's really the what's coming down the pipeline, right? Like,
Yep.
well, what can I expect? And then is there I always say it because my mom did, but a Reader's Digest version, a Cliff Notes version of like those standards somewhere that like you can just be like, hey, here's this, password requirements, multi-factor, EDR. Is that somewhere that somebody can go to and really just have a look at a page, digest it, being like, okay, this is what they're requiring now?
Welcome to my favorite topic. No.
There is not.
The
I
short
would
version
say
is that
absolutely that
Yeah.
this is one of the hardest things to try to communicate because there really isn't an easy way. And maybe that's a side tangent for some consulting firm somewhere to Reader's Digest abridged version of every 500 page.
Yeah. I don't want
Can
to
you
call
make this
anyone.
like TurboTax so it does apply, doesn't apply, expand, it does apply, doesn't apply? Wishful thinking.
There's a couple of tools I want to call out for doing the closest thing we can find, but I'm with Anne on this. It is too difficult to do that because if you do, FTC released a document called "What Your Organization Needs to Know," and it's a list of 9 items that you should meet to meet the FTC guidelines, but it is thoroughly simplified. And
It is, but it feels also like it's in 47 parts.
Exactly.
Like,
it does. Step 3, I think, has 12 subsets in it you have to meet, so it's not quite just 9. But on top of that, by the time I like to make sure I'm understanding these and speaking with people who read these just like I do. So I sit in on a lot of webinars that talk about these, and so many times I see people just trying to Cliff Notes that Cliff Notes version that the FTC required, which means they're simplifying an already simplified thing. And so you may be getting information, and I think most of the people in this call got my maybe a little sassy comments during the last webinar I sat in on, because it felt like they had simplified it to the point you wouldn't have met those requirements anymore. So what can you do instead? Well, the first one is read the requirements in full. Yes, I know that's boring, but if you want to understand it, it's really the only way to do it. If you have to meet more than one, or if you want to have something that kind of bridges everything, there are some tools that I use. A big one is called the Secure Controls Framework, which is I believe, a nonprofit that works very hard to crosswalk every single type of compliance they can find into a single document. They have renamed most of the documents for that reason, and most of them are reworded in some way, but it is a fantastic, like a gigantic Excel spreadsheet that can help
It is
you
an eye
meet a
chart,
bunch
but
of
it
them.
is absolutely fantastic in that regard.
Exactly. It's a lot of auditors and GRC analysts working together to create something that means they don't have to do 20 different Excel documents. They can just do one and find out everything they meet because of it. Something like that can be useful, but your best bet is, if you don't want to read it and if you don't want to know, reach out to someone like us. We have read them and talked about them at length, not just in this podcast. And sometimes not having that in your brain is better. It allows you to do your actual job instead of thinking about all this like we do.
Oh, that's great. It's hire somebody if you don't know, right? It's
Exactly.
Yeah. No, thank you.
The last thing I'll mention kind of on that, the FTC guidelines came through, and they now have their very first requirement is designate a qualified individual. And this is a person in your organization or a contractor for your organization who understands the rules of what the FTC is requesting. They don't have to be a vCISO. They don't have to have a specific title. They don't have to have specific education requirements. The goal is that they understand how the FTC guidelines work and the safeguards rule and how you can meet it. The reason for that is so that you have designated someone in your staff whose job it is to understand this so that you can meet it better. If there is no one on your staff that can do that right now, reach out to someone else. CIT does offer that service, but it's a requirement now that someone on your staff knows this. And so saying, oh, we just didn't know, it's never been an excuse, but it's even less of an excuse now because it's the first thing on the list. And then to end on a kind of lighter note, because I realized that kind of got a little heavy, didn't it? There is so many other things that are coming out. Technology is constantly changing. OpenAI, we didn't even really touch on how it may be changing some of these, but keeping an eye open for what's happening, what's coming through, and realizing that anything that's hit the internet, anything like OpenAI, even if you aren't using it, is going to change the processes that are coming through. They're probably going to have something in the next round of cybersecurity renewals. I'm just waiting to see what the questions are.
Right. And coming from a less technical resource, I always lean back to adding to what Matthew said in that ignorance is not bliss here, and it can get you in trouble, but putting your head in the sand too, and not kind of being at least marginally aware of some things is not going to do anyone any service. Do I expect my husband to know about ChatGPT? No, not really, but a general awareness of what it is and why it's had an impact, probably good to talk with kids about. No, you may not use this for your homework.
As a very last thing I want to, and you gave me an idea, you mentioned people like not just reading it, not just popping up randomly. I think I'm going to have to start printing off just random security control frameworks, maybe just a couple of the NIST CSF items, and just leaving them around the house.
Yes.
So my partner can find them and be like, hey, what's this? And I just get to talk about it.
This is why I'm
wow.
asking this.
Post-it notes of like each little subset, just being like,
it's I wanted you to find that to quiz me.
yeah.
I love it. I love that idea. I love this. It's like a little Easter egg hunt of information and learning.
Oh my gosh.
Well, this is amazing. I think we got some really good, helpful action steps, which I love, as a person kind of coming in and listening, or a business, or maybe you're just out on your own. Definitely have some great ideas from this podcast. And if you have any questions, or you need help with compliance, or you want to talk to any of these people, please reach out to us at info@cit-net.com, or head out to our website at cit-net.com/podcast. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Matthew and Andrew, for joining us today. And we'll be back next week with an all-new episode.